Every 11 years, the magnetic North Pole, South Pole on the sun flip. So this solar maximum that we're currently in right now is a stronger one than like the previous one. The universe led me into discovering alchemy. And as I started reading it, it was fascinating because I was like, oh, this alchemy is not at all what we were taught in school. It's the wisdom is the gold. And it's this really ancient tradition of the process of transformation. I believe that we're coming into a time now where humanity needs to wake up to more of our galactic being, that we are not just citizens of Earth, we are citizens of the galaxy, we are citizens of the cosmos. Most people, when they think of Kabbalah, they associate it with Jewish mysticism, but Kabbalah itself is more ancient than any of the religions. It's more universal in its system. It's more pure, if you will, in the sense that it's about knowing thyself.
I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Theresa Bullard. How you doing, Dr. Theresa?
Good. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm excited. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. I watched your show on Gaia a while ago, and I was just like, anytime I can get a physicist. I've had met many quantum physicists, NASA rocket scientists, anyone in the sciences who are also discussing spirituality they're unicorns. There are not very many of them out there.
I like being a unicorn.
Yes, so it's not a lot of them out there. And it's where I think we're all going. It's kind of like this melting of the science and the spirituality, or as I like to call it, the science and the woo, the woo-woo. So I have to ask you, so from being a physicist, how did you go from being a physicist to the woo-woo? The spiritual woo-woo, this insanity that a lot of people in your field look at like, what are you doing? Yeah. So how did that happen?
Well, I think it's a journey, first of all. And I think I had the advantage at the beginning of having been raised with a very open mind. So I was exposed to some metaphysics, some energy healing and stuff through my parents, especially my mom. And so I grew up with some of it. However, when I was younger, I thought it was too woo-woo, too eccentric, too out there, and I just wanted to be normal and fit in, and so I pushed it away. But then as I got into university, and I was getting on the track of science and starting to pursue physics, I was very interested in astrophysics, and I really wanted to understand how the universe worked, right? Mm-hmm. I had big questions. And but then I also went to University of Denver, where it was more of a liberal arts school. So I had to do diversify. I had different like honors English and various world religions and so forth. So I got exposed to a lot there again, and got really. I think my first personal resonance was in this English class where we had to read the transcendental poets like Wordsworth and William Blake and Thoreau, and I thought, yeah, this really resonates. And then. So I explored a lot in my, teens and early 20s, I suppose. But it was all just on the side. I was very career driven and focused and into athletics. And as I got into graduate school, I found myself immersed in 80 hours of left brain physics a week, just pursuing that PhD. And it was I went from a life of diversity to a life of just one thing. There's only room for one thing here, and that's science. Mm-hmm. And after about a year of that, I found myself feeling really out of balance. And because of that, I actually found myself depressed for the first time in what I could remember of my life at that point, and really dissatisfied with what graduate school was turning out to be. I thought we would be able to explore more the meaning of the quantum physics and why is this, and get into deeper conversations. But it was like the exact opposite. It's like, don't ask questions about philosophy, don't talk about consciousness, and God forbid talking about spiritual anything, and just learn how to derive the equations and do pass your tests, all of that. And so that put me in a position where I was like, something's got to change, because if I don't find that meaning and that balance and that well-being again in my life, I'm not going to survive this. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to be efficient. So like a scientist, I very systematically brought back in the aspects of life that I had had prior.
Mm-hmm.
I brought back in sports and social time and creative hobbies, and another year goes by and everything's better, but not quite, the joy is still missing. Mm-hmm. And then one day I was just thinking about it in the back of my mind while I was at the gym, and this little voice kind of came in and said, there's one thing you haven't brought back in. And that one thing was the spirituality. Mm-hmm. It's sort of always been there, but I never had to put it up front. And all of a sudden it was like, well, it's the only thing I have to go on. I was a bit surprised because by that point I was very indoctrinated into the scientific way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And spirituality to me was always just sort of my background philosophy versus the thing. Mm-hmm. But here it was the only thing I had to go on. So I dove into science and consciousness, science and spirituality, anywhere where the two would meet, mm-hmm. because I couldn't believe anything spiritually at that point that negated what I knew to be true scientifically. But I felt that there was also a lot of room in science for there to be metaphysical components to it. They needed to match up. Mm-hmm. So as an example, in math, there's certain constants, fundamental constants in the universe. And they, like pi and phi and e, and these numbers actually all connect. There's a beautiful place where they all connect and come together. And it's almost like this is too perfect. There's this fine tuning within the universe. In astrophysics and cosmology, we learn that the universe is so finely tuned to be conducive to life. Mm-hmm. And even consciousness to evolve, that even if one of those things, like the mass of the electron, if that was just a little bit different than it is now, mm-hmm. we would not be here, mm-hmm. right? So to me, I saw everything, there's some perfection here, there's some intentionality here that's, part of a greater plan that we're still trying to discover. And I felt that there's an intelligence, and that to me there's a spirit, there's a purpose to it all. So I dove into trying to find that where the two met.
So yeah, it seems like you were kind of like, you snuck into the physics department almost as a sleeper cell of spirituality, because normally, now when you did all this was after your degree, or this is before your degree was over?
I was in the midst of it.
So it's kind of like you got in and you're doing the math and you're doing all the stuff that needs to be done for your PhD, but you're also, going into waking up. Yeah. That's fascinating, because I've heard of people who've gone through their career and maybe have had 5 or 10 years in their career, then wake up. But you were like right in the middle of. Now, at any point did you just like, this physics stuff is just not making sense? And like, did at any point you just like, do I want to finish this?
That's a great question. You got me. Oh my goodness. I actually tried to leave physics 5 times between undergrad and grad school. There was probably 5 points along the way where I was like, I'm out of here.
What is it, because of the belief system, or is it because of the pain and the struggle that it is to get a PhD in physics?
You know what? It was the hardest subject for me. Of all the subjects that
Physics?
Physics was the hardest. So for whatever reason.
Why did you go into a PhD into that, Theresa?
It was kind of one of those things where the universe led me into it. I never would have picked physics, but so can I tell you another story?
Please.
Okay. So I was going into my senior year of high school. And I was looking at universities, and I knew I was going to go and I felt like at that stage in my life, I want to go as far as I need to go with my career to never hit the glass ceiling as a woman. Mm-hmm. And, I was looking at, what am I going to major in? Should I do psychology? Mm-hmm. Should I do this? Should I do that? I thought maybe math, maybe chemistry. I don't know. And I wasn't necessarily super gung-ho on science at the time, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But as we were looking at universities, and I was trying to get a volleyball scholarship as mm-hmm. well to help pay for my college, my mom and I had gone off and we were traveling around on a road trip to look at a couple different universities. And we went out to Phoenix, University of Phoenix. And I knew I wanted to go out of state. I was like, get me out of Southern California.
Most people want to stay in Southern California.
It's beautiful weather, but yeah, I needed the four seasons. I needed depth.
It's always you always want what you don't have. It's just amazing.
Yes,
most people are like, I promise you, people in Michigan or in Buffalo in the middle of the winter go, Southern California, not so bad.
Yes, I know. But there, my soul called me to an adventure, if you will.
Fair enough.
And so we were going from Phoenix up to Northern Arizona University, and on the way we decided to stop through Sedona. And so my mom and I were just, doing a little vacation, if you will, while also going and checking out universities. And in Sedona, of course, you've got all these vortexes. It's a very spiritual place. And we got a little tour to go around to see the vortexes. And I was just really inspired by it. We had a lot of synchronicities happening during that time. And then as we were driving out, we were on our way to Northern Arizona. My mom was driving. You know how in the desert you have it's like beautiful night sky, no light pollution.
Yes.
And she's driving and I'm looking out and, I've been inspired by this experience and I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing all the stars and I see the whole Milky Way galaxy going across the sky. And I'm like, wow, that is so amazing. What's out there? I want to know what's out there. There's so much more to the universe than our mundane little lives down here. And I want to know what's out there. And that was the moment when that's what I want to major in. And I decided I wanted to do astronomy.
Okay.
To understand the universe. But then in the university that I chose, which is the University of Denver, it's the one that felt right to me. Just intuitively, this feels right. But they didn't have astronomy as a major. And so the advisor was like, well, do you want to go? Do you think you'll go to graduate school at some point? I was like, yeah, I do. I think so. He's like, well, then what's most important if you want to do astronomy down the line is that you have a physics background. And then maybe you could do astronomy or astrophysics down the line. I was like, okay. Physics was the last subject I would have chosen, but I'll trust you. And that's how I got into physics. And but why I wanted to leave it a couple times was really because Newtonian science.
Oh, yes, I get it. No, the second you said that, I was like, okay, I get it. Mm-hmm. I get it. It's such a dogmatic look at it's very much it's a religion.
Well, it had become it had become the scientific dogma for a couple hundred years. I think Newton himself would be rolling in his grave at what they made of the science because he was an alchemist, he was very spiritual, and he revolutionized the world at the time through his science. But he did say, he warned, don't take God out of the equation. Don't try to make the universe a great machine. And that's exactly what they did.
We are in a time of great change, and humanity is awakening more and more every day. Mankind needs insights on what is happening to all of us. That is why I'm inviting you to Wisdom from Beyond, a 6-day virtual summit designed to awaken your soul. Experience over 9 hours of soul-expanding channeling sessions led by 6 of the world's most esteemed channelers. Connect with the divine, receive sacred insights, and transform your journey by asking questions directly to the channelers themselves. This is more than just a summit. It is your gateway to understanding the profound shifts happening within and around all of us. Plus, when you sign up, you receive exclusive bonus content to deepen your spiritual exploration. Join us and step into the extraordinary.
Isn't it funny that that's basically what they've done with all great teachers? I mean, let's not even talk about Jesus, but all great teachers, they kind of strip away the stuff that doesn't appeal to what they're trying to achieve.
The agenda.
Yeah. And in all fields, it's all fields. It's like that. Even Einstein, when we were talking, Einstein was I don't know if he was a spiritual person, but he definitely was an intuitive person. And he also basically went so far, he's like, there is an organizing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's an organizing force.
He believed in God. I mean, he wanted to understand the mind of God.
Right. Yeah. So, but when you hear of Einstein, it's physics and that's it. And, and then Oppenheimer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But the greatest scientists, the greatest mathematicians, all connect to the ether, the Akashic field, the source. They channel in many ways. Wasn't when Einstein would play the violin to get ideas, it was just a form of channeling, essentially. Is that correct?
Yeah, most of the really brilliant revolutionaries in science have a musical side to them, or they have some other really creative, artistic side to them. Yeah. So it's like they're accessing more the whole brain, right? They have the right brain kind of creative capacity. They have the left brain, detail oriented, and the linear logical, but they know how to access both hemispheres. Whereas I would say the education of science is very, very heavily left brain. So they don't really emphasize that whole brain. It's about staying in the box, if you will.
Of course.
And yeah, so my experience of Newtonian physics, so my first several years of education in physics it was all classical. It was all Newtonian based. And it was very practical, right? It's like how to build buildings, how to make an airplane. It's, how to calculate the speed of a baseball. It's, it's practical stuff that we experience in our macroscopic 3D world, but it was not interesting to me. I'm like, I want to know what's out there. I want to understand the deeper principles.
Did you ever think of going into quantum physics?
Well, that's the thing is it was only when I got to what they called modern physics and quantum physics that it was like, oh, this is interesting. Now, this intuitively, I got it. Whereas classical physics, it didn't connect as well for me. So it's almost like innately and intuitively, I really understood quantum physics, even without necessarily having to do all the math of it. I understood the principles of it. But the Newtonian physics was just like, it was so mechanical and it was so, I don't know, it just didn't connect for me. I had a harder time with it. So it was dull. Yeah. It was dull. And but in science education, you're usually going to start out with the classical physics first. And then, so once they've programmed you into the Newtonian way of thinking and perceiving and doing, then they start to introduce you to quantum. And then you have to, it doesn't make sense to most people because it's so contrary to the Newtonian principles.
Your base is completely counterintuitive of what your fun stuff is teaching. So, Of course not. It's kind of like when we're teaching writing and storytelling. They teach you the classics. You go back to Plato. You go back to the real basics of it. And by the time you get to Quentin Tarantino... You're like, what is happening? What's going on? Yeah. Or Chris Nolan, you're like, what's happening? It's a very difficult thing, but that's, I guess, the systems. They have to teach you the classics, but they kind of impregnate you with these ideas that it's very difficult to program you to get you to become a free thinker. They don't build free thinkers. No. In American education, I'm not sure about European as well, but either of them, I don't think they teach free thinkers, generally speaking.
Not so much anymore. When the quantum physics revolution came around, they were free thinkers. Especially the younger generation at that time. Einstein would have been actually the older generation at that time. And then you had your people like Niels Bohr and Schrodinger and these guys who were the founding fathers of quantum physics. They came along and they were pushing against the old paradigm, if you will. And they were free thinkers. And there was amazing dialogue, amazing conversation. They even talked about the consciousness and what role it has to play within quantum physics. And but at some point, scientists just decided we need to get back to the business of science. So let's put all these philosophical conversations to the side and let's just get back to the technology, the applicability, the science of it, right? That the philosophy, the spiritual, whatever, that's not our domain. And so then they just sort of swept it into the closet, the whole consciousness piece of the conversation. And then, by the time my generation came along, it's, just here's how you do it, derive it, first principles, it's the math, it's the skepticism, you got to poke holes at the argument, there's no room for talking about philosophy. And I remember this point in my graduate school where I had passed, once I'd gotten past the qualifying exams, which was its own journey, I was then told by my advisor, okay, now that you've gotten to this point, now you need to come up with something original, an original contribution to the field of science that's never been done before.
Oh.
And I looked at him and I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to start, right? Because that's not how I've been trained in school. It's like I've been trained to do and, not think originally, but to just follow. And so that was actually one of the things that probably led me to feeling really depressed, is I felt very cut off from my creative side. I felt very cut off from my intuitive side, like my feminine side. Everything got very cut off in the process of trying to fit into the mold of the physics mentality. And that's ultimately why I broke out of just going and following a traditional track, is because I needed to have more balance and more wholeness. And the more I discovered my spirituality, at some point I realized actually my passion is, I have a passion for science. It's very, there's certain things that are very interesting to me.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have a passion for the consciousness and human potential and the spiritual side. And at some point I realized, my purpose is to bring the two together, which means I'm not going to follow a traditional track.
So when you decided to go off the rails, as you will,
off the beaten path. Let's say that.
Off the beaten path, though some would think off the rails, depending on the point of view, I guess. But when you decided to go off the beaten path, what was it like for your colleagues and for your family and your friends and people who are around you? Because you are definitely a free thinker at this point. You're going against the grain. You're pretty much committing sacrilege, talking about this stuff, and not only talking about it, but teaching it and getting on shows and doing all of this. What did the community? Because I know it's a very small, little tight knit community, like a knitting circle. What did they say? How did you deal with that? Because that takes a tremendous amount of bravery.
Yeah, I wasn't brave at first.
Most aren't.
I was following my heart, but I wasn't brave enough to be open about it.
Right. You were closeted.
Yes. I was in the closet about my spirituality.
Sure.
Within the physics community.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being deathly afraid of losing credibility, right? That's the big threat in the physics, in the science industry in general, I would say, is you can't lose your credibility. If you lose your credibility, you won't get published. If you don't get published, you won't get a job. This kind of,
can't
get tenure, all of that.
Yeah.
And so I was very quiet and about it. And I just showed up. I was quiet. I did my work, did my research, and kept the spiritual stuff to my free time. And fortunately, though, I had a family that was very accepting. I had a mother who I could talk with about anything.
True.
And I searched for community outside of the science department.
Mm-hmm.
And I even, for a while, when I started to teach in some of these metaphysical classes and do some healing modalities and so forth, I took on an alias for a while because I was really afraid of losing that credibility or getting found out, if you will, within the science department. But so it's quite a journey of living two lives. And that was also part of my process of my own coming into integration. Is like I had to stop keeping them separate because it was kind of tearing me apart.
But it was a process that you needed to go through.
Yeah, I would say so.
You had to it's a journey you had to walk, and it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this quiet, like, I'm just going to do this on the side. I'm going to do this on the side. I'm like, I have to choose.
I think it was a journey to coming to know myself.
Yep.
To face my fears.
Yep.
To accept myself, even if they didn't accept me.
It takes a tremendous amount of bravery.
Yeah, and it was, I had to take some leaps at certain points. And I remember at one point, it was like, I don't want to, I started off in neutrino physics. Mm-hmm. And neutrinos are these little particles that come from the sun, also from supernova. And we were detecting them I was working with the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, working to, figure out what they called the neutral signal that came from the neutrinos. And I remember looking at my advisors and who was around me as a model for what what kind of career trajectory that would look like in the end. And I asked them, well, what did you do before this? And what did you do before that? And they were always chasing neutrinos. And I was like, I don't want to chase neutrinos for the rest of my life. They're interesting, but that's not what I'm here for, right? And so I left that, and I actually I pulled out of graduate school for a while. I went and worked at a national lab for a bit. And in that process, I was taking further steps on my spiritual path. And I actually got put in a position of, okay, here's a modality to do that awakens people's potential, called the life activation or DNA activation. And I personally had benefited from it. And then it was being given to me, or handed down to me in the mystery school tradition to do it for others. And when I started doing it for others, I found that there was like real fulfillment in and real joy in having a hand in helping somebody one-on-one directly improve their lives. And the more I did that, the more I felt fulfilled. And so on one hand, I was doing my research, and it was in non-proliferation in the national lab, and like nuclear detection and stuff. And then on the other hand, I was doing these spiritual healing and DNA activation and life activation modalities for people. And, neither of them crossed paths. They were very separate, but one gave me a lot of joy and fulfillment. And the other one, the only one who cared about it was, me and whoever I was working for. And so I had this really stark contrast between service and in a more spiritual, metaphysical way, and the pursuit of knowledge and, maybe technology just for the sake of itself. It was very basic science. Right. And I thought, I got to follow my heart here. I got to follow what fulfills me.
Yeah, but you still got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
There's that. So how did that work out?
Yeah. Well, I started doing just on the side. Actually, what I ended up doing, because I was going to leave graduate school at that time and just take my master's and go. I wasn't going to get the PhD. And I started looking for a job, but I wanted it to be a job where I could just be myself and kind of bridge the consciousness and the science. And, I went and applied like with the Monroe Institute to see if they had a position. I talked to Bill Tiller, who was a scientist who's kind of doing some research in consciousness. I talked with a couple different people, and the overwhelming message, they were like, we would love to have you, but you really should go back and finish your PhD. And so it was like this message kept coming to go finish the PhD. So I went back.
But the thing is that I think people like yourself who are in the sciences and you've reached a certain level, like a PhD, adds a lot of credibility to what we're doing now. It's not woo-woo. You're not a gypsy at a carnival anymore talking about this kind of stuff. And you're not the only one. I've had multiple people who came from all fields, from the highest levels of government to rocket scientists to quantum physicists and physicists as well, doctors, PhD, all of them, who have come over to the spiritual side of the force, if you will, and started to teach, but add credibility to essentially an area that was extremely woo. And I use the woo, and the freak flag would fly in so many ways. I say that with all the love in the world.
Yes.
But you're adding a lot of credibility to it, and it takes a tremendous amount of bravery to do that. It's the number one fear of a human is to be ousted from the tribe, more than death.
Yeah.
And which is ridiculous, but it is what it is. So let me ask you, where do you see the bridge between science and spirituality? How do these two things meet and talk to each other in your point of view?
When I was first exploring that, where is that bridge? I think that quantum physics really lends itself well to a lot of ancient mystical teachings. I started off like reading stuff like Tao physics, for example, where it's Eastern philosophy meets, quantum physics. And I thought, oh, this is great. I read Lynn McTaggart's book, The Field, which I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And different books, but my frustration with all of it was that it was so theoretical. And I was an experimental scientist, so it was like I knew we have to bring it to practical. Like, how can we ground this? How can we test it? How can we apply it? because it won't be accepted until it can become practical versus just conceptual. And somehow the universe led me, as I started asking the right questions, the universe led me into discovering alchemy. And that, at first, I had the mindset, the program mindset, that the alchemists were just trying to turn lead into gold.
Yeah, Merlin.
We know that that's not possible, and they're all pseudo whatever, they're charlatans. So I had this sort of scapegoat about them in my mind from programming. But then this book, again, Synchronicity, just said, nope, you need to pay attention to this. And there's multiple things that pointed to it all at the same time. And I was like, okay, I'm going to open up my mind. I'm going to read the book that came to me. It was a book on the Emerald Tablets by Dennis Wayne Hauk. It was commentary on the Emerald Tablets. And as I started reading it, it was fascinating because I was like, oh, this alchemy is not at all what we were taught in school. It's the wisdom is the gold, and it's this really ancient tradition of the process of transformation, whether it's the self-transformation or the transformation of a plant into a medicine, or a mineral into something that is even more valuable, or the transformation of stardust into a planet. It's the formula of transformation, and it's very universal. And not only that, but science came out of alchemy. All the early scientists were alchemists. Right. And so I realized through this that this is a major key, because when it was alchemy, science and spirituality were integrated. They were one thing. They weren't separated. The scientists would go into their lab and be preparing to do some experiment with, some chemicals or some light, or do some distillation process. And before they would do that, they would do prayers, they would do some ritual, they would do meditation, because they knew that they were entangled with their experiment, and that they had to be in the right state for the experiment to turn out right. So that was their philosophy. And then only later, sometime after Newton, did the science split away from the spiritual implications. And I think actually it was a political thing, because the church was persecuting the scientists.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Galileo, anyone?
And many others,
and
right?
Many
They were being declared heretics because they were, coming with these theories that were different from what the church doctrine was. And so the scientists split away in order to
survive,
give them the freedom to pursue knowledge.
Yeah, that church. it does do a few things. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you were the Newton. What was it? Not Newton, but neutrons.
Neutrinos.
Neutrinos. Thank you. Those are from the sun or something along those lines?
They're small, tiny particles that are part. I mean, they came out from the Big Bang. They're part of the nuclear reactions, whether it's fusion or fission. Neutrinos will come out. Usually with fusion, in particular, they carry energy, but they don't interact through the strong force or the electromagnetic force or the gravitational force. So they only interact with matter through what's called the weak force. So they're very hard to detect.
So the reason I bring that up is because lately there's been a lot of talk of solar flares.
Yes, we're in the midst of it.
Yes, so there's a lot of solar flares. There's talk of a solar flash. I've spoken to the woo-woo people about it. I'm joking. I've spoken to other people about it, but I haven't had a conversation about it with a physicist, from a physicist who's also spiritual point of view. So can you, because there's a lot of fear around this. Can you explain what these flares are about, what they do, what they're doing to our atmosphere, to our Earth in general, from a physics standpoint, and then also from a spiritual standpoint? Because from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, our electromagnetic field that normally protects us from those kind of things is either weakening or thinning because of the cycle that we're in right now. Is that correct or incorrect?
So the sun, the solar model today has like an 11-year cycle. Every 11 years, the magnetic North Pole, South Pole on the sun flip. And so it's every 11 years this happens. And when it comes time where it's getting close to what they call solar maximum, the magnetic field lines start getting tangled up on the sun. And when they get really tangled, that's when you have then a solar flare, an ejection of solar mass and light and particles and whatnot to kind of release out. It jets out. And so this solar maximum that we're currently in right now is a stronger one than like the previous ones, for example. But there's cycles that, on a cosmic scale, these cycles are a regular thing.
Sure.
On a human scale, it may seem like a big deal because our cycles are very small by comparison to cosmic cycles. And then when the mass and whatnot, the solar flare ejects all this matter, these plasma, this photons, neutrons, neutrinos, all of it coming out, it hits our Earth, and the magnetic field of the Earth will react because you have all this highly charged ionic energy and light that works through the electromagnetic force. It's going to interact with the magnetic field of Earth. And some of it gets drawn in. Some of it bounces off and just kind of bends around the Earth, and some of it gets drawn in through the field. And as it gets drawn in, it does shift the frequency of like Schumann resonance and so forth. The frequency of the Earth starts to shift. It will create a more highly charged field inside our atmosphere, if you will, more ions, right? So there's more electric charge, and that can affect weather.
How does that affect us?
It can affect us for sure, because we are bioelectromagnetic.
Of course.
Right? We have biofield around our heart, around our brain. And what I feel is that if you are prone to imbalance, then that kind of light and higher charge coming in will amplify the imbalance. But if you are balanced, then that charge and that light comes in and it amplifies your alignment, your balance, right? So it's not bad. It's not necessarily all good. It's based on the individual and how they harness it, which is kind of true. If you look at astrology, for example, you can have conjunctions and squares and, various alignments that for some people, it might be like, oh no, right? Oh God, Mercury's going retrograde or whatever. And for others, it's like, okay, great. Now I know how to use this, right? I can plan accordingly. And so I think it's always a tool that we have to learn how to harness. But when you have more light coming in, and not only from our sun, I mean, we've had light coming in from other cosmic sources. Sometimes it's coming from the center of the galaxy. There's even a nova that's about to hit the Earth, right?
Yeah, let me stop you for a second. The nova that's coming, Betelgeuse, right?
Yeah, somewhere out that way.
Not Michael Keaton, but
the star.
But he's a star as well. But the other kind of star.
Yes.
From my understanding is when that gets to us, it will become a permanent part of our sky, essentially. That we'll always have something up there, kind of like a shining light.
It might be brighter for a while,
yeah.
Until, and it depends on how much and for how long that nova energy. And I mean, when that actually exploded, it would have been 3,000 light years, it would have been 3,000 years ago, but it's taken that long to hit Earth because it's, around 3,000 light years away. It's ancient light actually coming from the cosmos to influence us here now.
And how will it influence us?
I think that there's various cosmic energies coming in to trigger awakenings. We're in a time on the planet where humanity needs to awaken. We need to become more conscious of the light. We need to become more conscious of our connection to the whole cosmos, because we are so focused on our dramas of human society on Earth, and we think that this is it. Everything about what we experience in this 3D physical human construct is it, but it's not. This is like just a speck of dust in like the vast cosmos, and yet because of entanglement, because everything is connected, we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. as above, so below. I'm going to go really metaphysical here for a moment. And so whatever is happening above, and then it comes and it actually shines upon us, it's trying to awaken something here below. So I believe that we're coming into a time now where humanity needs to wake up to more of our galactic being, that we are not just citizens of Earth, we are citizens of the galaxy, we are citizens of the cosmos, that what we do here on Earth plays a role, like it ripples out, right? We're not a closed box, that what we do here doesn't matter outside. It does matter. It ripples out. Everything is connected. Mm-hmm. And so it's like trying to wake us up to this time where we realize that we need to be more responsible as humans for our thoughts, for our words, for our deeds, for what we're doing on this earth and how that ripples out into the universe. And I think the light, that's the amplified light that's coming in, whether physically from cosmological sources or spiritually from, higher spiritual planes coming down, like veils being removed right now. And all of that is bringing more light so that we can wake up, so that we can see what it is we need to change in our way of being on this planet.
So there's another thing that's coming in too, is that asteroid is coming. Not the one that's going to kill us, but a little asteroid apparently that's going to be circling circling around around the moon. In all of my days, I have never heard of this happening at least to us, any time in history that I know of. I might be mistaken. There has to be some, and maybe I'm just looking for something here, but there has to be some significance to that at this time. Like, again, like all these cosmic things are happening between solar flares, between the juice and lights and energy. There seems to be a lot of something's happening, and it seems to be coming to a head, that something's going to pop. And I don't mean in a bad way. I mean in a good way, an awakening, a shift in timeline, a shift in trajectory of humanity. But there's these little signs all over the place. So people should not be afraid of this asteroid.
No, okay. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's asteroids and comets. There's asteroids all throughout our solar system. Sure. And every now and then we'll get one coming that we didn't realize was even there. And
because we don't know everything.
We don't know everything. And sometimes, we're looking through our telescopes, but it's obscured by the sun, for example, and it's coming from that direction. All of a sudden we get caught off guard. But this, but they have orbits, right? So this isn't a new thing. This isn't the first time it's coming. And maybe it's just we're paying attention to it now.
Yeah.
So
we can pay attention to it.
We can pay attention to it, and we are paying attention to it, right? It's being talked about, whereas maybe in the past it wasn't really talked about, or people weren't paying attention to it.
I know about it. I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist by any stretch, or an astronomer. So
yeah,
if it got to me,
it's pretty fascinating though how it's coming in. It's going to loop around
the moon,
the in between the moon and the Earth, and then it's going to go around. It's got a very interesting.
How big is it?
Oh, that I haven't looked at.
Yeah, but it's not that big.
It's big enough, but it's it's not on a collision course or anything, so we don't have to worry about it. But I think what's happening that's interesting is there's this confluence of events. You have the solar maximum, you have this asteroid coming, and just sort of orbiting. So we'll have a second moon, that's what they're calling it, right? And then you have this nova, and there's so much happening right now, and it's all coming into this confluence of time, right? So there's a concentration of galactic energy coming in at the moment.
And didn't they just, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they think that they found another planet in the asteroid belt or something that they found there, that they're like, wait, there's something there?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. They're finding another, whether it's either Planet X or Planet 9.
Yeah.
They're definitely finding new, either Earth-size or bigger planets out there in our solar system. They're just further out there, and they're dark, so they're not as easy to detect. But they detect it by seeing deviations in the gravitational pull and orbits of other things nearby, and that's how they detect it.
So that's something. Again, I know this, so I'm not reading science manuals, or science papers or published papers. Yeah. So if I'm hearing about these things, it's pretty fascinating that a lot of these concepts like quantum physics, are being talked about in public in very deep ways. And it's in our media, it's in our films, the concept of the multiverse, parallel realities, the Mandela effect. Yeah. All these things are coffee table kind of talk, you know?
I think that's wonderful.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, because honestly, like even just 20 years ago.
Oh, 10.
Yeah, but people, you talk quantum physics, they look at you like you're talking a foreign language and they don't know why they should even care. And now it's becoming more common to talk about it. So that to me is an indication that humanity is ready to shift from this old Newtonian mindset into a more quantum mindset. You know, it's interesting. This is one of the things I'm really passionate about is that, you know, when Newton came out with his Principia and his laws of gravity and physics and whatnot, there was 4 principles that emerged out of that. And those 4 principles were applied outside of physics. They were applied to everything in society. They were applied to economics. They were applied to relationships. They were applied to, you know, the like business structures. They were applied to so many different things. And they were based on, number one, that things can be broken down into their individual parts. And as long as you can understand the individual parts, you can understand the whole. 2, everything is deterministic. Mm-hmm. So we should be able to, you know, if we know the initial conditions, we should be able to predict exactly how it will unfold, and therefore we can also control it. 3, everything was separate, right? So there was, let's see, separation, there's material or, materialism, like everything is physically real. And it kind of took mind and consciousness out of it. It said consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of material stuff in the brain. Right. It's reducible to its parts, and it's got to be rational. Everything has to be rational, reasonable, you know. So
none of that works in a relationship. Absolutely.
Well, they tried to make it, you know, a lot of psychology at the time became based on that. Like economic, everything, you know, it's like, and then you add to that Darwinian, you know, survival of the fittest.
Sure.
Which was another misinterpretation, because it's actually the cooperation that was more important, and it was the elimination of the weakest versus the survival of the fittest that Darwin was writing about. But, you know, that was
neither here nor there.
The marketing was, you know, sexier, I suppose, with the survival of the fittest.
As I've gone down the ancient text path and started reading and started having conversations with experts, you start reading, there's a lot about marketing. Mm-hmm. Since the beginning. It really, like, you know, so
narratives and agendas.
The Rapture was written by a publisher who wanted to sell more Bibles. Yeah, in the late 1800s. Oh, God. I'm like, what? He goes, oh, hey, you can look it up. And you're like, oh my God. Yeah, wow. So, you know what I mean? These kind of things are just like, so the more you dig in, you start seeing the cracks of these old systems, these old ideas that at one point served us. You know, I pick on, I'm a recovering Catholic, so I pick on the Vatican constantly. But at one point, you know, dogmatic religions were absolutely needed and served humanity. At a certain point, science, in its dogmatic way, served humanity. But we're getting to a stage or an era that's not the case anymore.
It's not serving it.
It's not serving. If anything, it's now trying to hold us back in all aspects, from economics to medicine to healing, all of it. It's all being held up. But everyone seems to be fighting it more and more. These conversations are becoming more public and being seen by more and more people around the world. So it's an exciting and terrifying time all at the same time.
It's very exciting, you know, and yeah, we're going through a paradigm shift, right? Yeah. And any time you have a paradigm shifting moment, you have the old paradigm that fights for survival, and you have the new paradigm that's trying to come in and it's having to fight against the attacks from the old. And, you know, there's this messiness that happens in between.
That's where we are.
That is definitely where we are right now. And you know, there was an author, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And unfortunately, he said, you know, for that new paradigm to come in, often the older generation has to kind of die off, right? And then the younger generations come into, you know, who come with this new paradigm, and then they come in and implement. And but we're starting to see that. We're starting to see this new generation rising into, you know, they're in their adulthood now, and they're in, you know, getting stronger and stepping into more leadership kind of and innovation. And all of this has been, I mean, our world has changed so much in the last 20 years, the last 10 years. Like, there's been so much change, and it's been coming with this new paradigm energy. And but I think that, and this is why I chose ultimately to leave the traditional science track and try to bridge the science and spiritualities, that I saw that even with the knowledge that was increasing and the technologies that were increasing, the wisdom was not increasing. And we were taking our technologies in a direction, a more and more secular direction, less spiritually guided, and therefore less sort of moral obligation to apply it in a way that was for the good of the whole. And I just felt like our knowledge in tech was outpacing the wisdom of humanity, and we needed wisdom. I think technology is fantastic. I think knowledge and scientific advancement is fantastic, but we need it to be guided by higher principles to help us make sure that we're harnessing it towards the good of the whole, rather than putting ourselves on a course of self-destruction. And so I felt that the science and spirituality needed to come back together. There needed to be an alchemy where we've been through a phase of separation, and now we need to come back to a conjunction so that there can be a harmony. And I don't see any, maybe between certain dogmatic religious approaches to spirituality, there's conflict with science, but in a more universal kind of spirituality, where it's not about any particular dogma or doctrine, but it's more universal principles, but from a more metaphysical and human spirit kind of perspective, they align perfectly and beautifully. And that's a lot of what I teach in the mystery teachings on Gaia TV. That's a lot of what I teach in my work, in the world. And so I see, that the quantum principles, which kind of turn the Newtonian principles on their head, that instead of things being separate, they're connected. Instead of things being reducible to, just material reality, you have consciousness plays a really important role. Instead of everything being deterministic, you have things that are contextual, like it really depends on the individual context and what we choose to do with it, right? Because the universe is participatory, so free will can come in and redirect the way that things manifest, and instead of being like really easily deterministic, there's this thing called complementarity in quantum physics, which brings in an uncertainty, and inside the uncertainty is where infinite possibilities become accessible. And so there's these other principles that come from quantum physics that I think if we as a society could learn to understand these four principles without having to get into all the math and the rigor of the science, but just extract the principles and see how they match up beautifully with things like Hermetic principles, various universal, spiritual, mystical, ancient wisdom teachings match up beautifully with these principles, and then kind of apply them into various areas of life like Newtonian science had been. Because while we want to move beyond the old paradigm it served us for a while, as you said, but it's become a limitation now. And we're not keeping up with the pace of, when we're in that old paradigm, it does not work well in our highly connected, highly uncertain, highly complex, fast-paced world that we live in today. And we need a new paradigm, a new structure to align ourselves with and perceive through. But we still need a framework to grab onto, because the human mind really needs that framework, right? It needs a guidance system, a way to navigate its way through the times, but it needs to be applicable. So, this is something that that I'm really out there teaching is how the quantum principles can become a new framework, where you don't have to necessarily align it specifically with like woo-woo stuff, but it can become something where the universal principles and the role of consciousness really can play a role, and it can start to open people up more in a scientific way, if you will, towards why it's important for us to raise our consciousness, why it's important for us to learn to meditate, why it's important for us to quiet the mind and clean up negative ego, and all of these things that we do on a spiritual path of growth, and yet we can do it in a way that's it doesn't have to feel so woo-woo.
Now, speaking of woo-woo, you've spoken about a concept called the universal Kabbalah?
Kabbalah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Can you I've never heard of this term. I have know nothing about it. So I'm really fascinated with it. Can you explain it a little bit?
Okay. Well, most people, when they think of Kabbalah, they associate it with Jewish mysticism, which is a vast study, a vast branch of Kabbalah. But Kabbalah itself is more ancient than any of the religions. Judaism, Christianity,
The Abrahamic religions. Yeah.
Abrahamic religions, yeah.
Basically.
But you could trace it back to at least ancient Egypt, maybe even Samaria.
So it came back that far, even to Samaria.
All the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if we look at from the Judeo-Christian kind of Genesis, you know, the story of Genesis, and I mean, that's, I think,
the earth is only
metaphorical.
6,000 years old.
Right.
We know that.
It's metaphorical, but it goes back to the first humans when we started to wake up beyond a certain level, right? I mean, It's a long teaching, but it came in from the beginning of when we started to ask questions and receive answers from within. And so the universal Kabbalah is not really about any particular religion. And it doesn't have to be tied to a particular religion. It's more universal in its system. It's more pure, if you will, in the sense that it's about knowing thyself. And the method is by asking questions and receiving answers. And the best answers, the most important answers, are the ones that come from within. But you have to first learn how to ask the right questions. And the right questions will lead you to the answers that are going to be most important for you to know thyself and to come to awaken more of your potential and align with your greater purpose. And so, yes, and in coming to know thyself, you also come to know Source, God, Spirit, whichever name you want to give it. And you come to understand various universal principles of creation and how energy flows from these highest realms of the spirit down into the physical. And so we study it as a system unto itself. And, you know, we can link it into many different spiritual traditions. I could link Universal Kabbalah to, obviously, to Judaic, to Christian, to the Sufi tradition. I could also overlay Taoism to it. You know, there's so many different ancient traditions, as well as more, you know, familiar ones of modern day that we can link into the Tree of Life, which is a central glyph of the Kabbalah. And it becomes this way of organizing. And instead of them being all these separate, different things, we can start to see where they're one thing. They're the same thing. They might have different names. They might have different sort of practices, but there's a universal essence to them all where they unite. And I love it because I can also overlay physics on top of it. I can overlay psychology on top of it, right? So it becomes this framework that we use with the Tree of Life and understanding each aspect of it. And we can use it to organize all the information that we're exposed to and bring it into greater sense of cohesiveness, order, connectivity, and then we go through a journey of what we call ascending the Tree of Life, to go from just thinking about life as purely physical, and step by step you go up this Tree of Life pattern and awaken different aspects of the soul, get to know yourself at deeper levels, and ascend it, raise your vibration up to the point where you have a direct connection with your own divinity, with your own.
So it sounds like it's a roadmap to enlightenment.
Exactly.
It's eventually where these gentlemen and ladies eventually got to, the ascended masters. They went up the Tree of Life essentially and just raising their frequency higher and higher and higher till they finally were able to connect.
Yeah, I think a roadmap is a great way. It's like life is a maze.
Yes.
And you can often head into dead ends and whatnot and pitfalls. But if you had the map to the maze, you could navigate your way through from, you know, into the center and back out. And that's what the Tree of Life gives you.
Can we? You mentioned frequency a couple times, and you know, when I first heard about vibes and vibrations, and you know, it was Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, but but you know, that concept came, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, probably out of the 60s, at least in popular terms, vibrations. But frequency is something that's very scientific, but it's also very woo-woo in a sense.
It gets used in a woo-woo way.
That's what I mean. Yes, it is also. Yes, I agree with you. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm on your side. But frequency, from my studies in the mystic arts and yogic philosophies and things like that, where the frequency of the person, of the human being, has to rise in order to reach the highest level of enlightenment. I always use the analogy of being at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and it's very hard and you can't move and there's a lot of pressure, but as you rise, it starts to get a little lighter, a little looser, and the pressure starts to get to the point where you can break the surface, and the difference between even the top layer of the water and the surface is still just a massive difference as far as freedom and movement are concerned. So that's the kind of analogy that I use for raising your frequency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So frequency is a measure of wavelength, and a wavelength of energy. So if you have something that everyone could probably relate to is the rainbow. Yeah. Right? You have the 7 colors of the rainbow. The red color is a lower frequency. The purple, as you go up, you step up the frequency ladder, and the purple is a higher frequency. And it has a lot to do with the wavelength. So the red has a longer wavelength, and the purple has a shorter wavelength.
Correct.
And so we can then relate that to us, because we have these 7 levels, 7 energy centers within the human system, which we call in the yogic tradition the chakras. And your root chakra is more the red, kind of lower frequency, and the crown is more the purple or the higher frequency. And it has to do with different levels of being. Root chakra is very primal. And it's very physically, I want this kind of stuff. There's lust-driven energy there, but it's also the energy that we manifest through. So it's not bad. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's literally where
you birth through.
You're conceived there, and you're birthed through there.
Exactly. And so we need to have an open root. We need to have a clean connection to that. But when you have distortion in that is where we have problems. Where people fall into lust and addiction and so forth. But when you have a positive, relationship with, and you're not attached to the physical, then you can manifest well when the root chakra is open. But as you go up, you're working with different aspects of your being. You work with your will, you work with power dynamics, you work with love and relationship, like in the sense of more heart-centered relationship. You work with expression and your creativity. You're working with greater wisdom and insight and imagination. And here you're working with spirit, like your own divinity. And so as we go up the chakras, we're sort of ascending or raising that consciousness up to higher and higher levels of awareness. However, you have some people who they want to be all up here, all in the crown chakra and the psychic, and it's all up here, and they're not grounded. And they're not, in their body, and they therefore can't usually manifest very well. They're not as functional in the world. So we as humans are meant to be both, right? We're here to have a physical life, right. But we need to remember that who we are is the eternal spirit, that consciousness, that pure awareness, I should say, that comes in, and it's here to have a physical experience. So we're here to master both sides of life. But, so you have some people in the spiritual sort of world, the reason they're called so woo-woo is they're airy-fairy up in the clouds and ungrounded about things. But then you have your people who are, just worldly, and they're not so spiritual, and they're missing, the whole connection of who we are, that higher wisdom that comes in. So we're meant to be both. So I don't think it's really about frequency specifically. Another way of looking at frequency is a radio station. Right. You have the radio dial, and you have different channels on the dial, and you shift to a different station. That station is broadcasting at a different frequency.
Right. And it's not higher or lower. It's just different.
It's a different plane
on the spectrum.
It's a plane of information,
right?
Right, and so we can broadcast certain information on one frequency, and we can broadcast other information on another frequency.
So that would bring in the concept of the psychic phenomenon and channeling, where the frequency is at a place where that person can tune into information that might be being broadcast all around us. We just can't connect to it. Very similar to microwaves, radio waves. Radio waves are around us all the time, but I'm not hearing the latest Eminem album in my head right now because I don't have the ability to connect to those wavelengths. So I'd love to hear your point from a scientific perspective, and then a metaphysical perspective of the concept of psychic phenomenon, channeling, these kind of things, which are being more and more researched to a point where, I mean, the government had the whole psyops ops, so someone took it seriously back then, but they're actually hooking up channels to brainwave, and there's something going on. Science doesn't really understand it yet, but there's definitely something happening when those things happen. So I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah, I think that science is starting to find ways to detect it now and to study and measure it. Whereas in the past, they just didn't really have the right equipment and tools to detect it. Or mindset, yeah. Science is very limited to what it can detect.
Very much so.
And what it can detect is, based on technology, as well as funding. So it's often driven by money.
And you need to be published.
Yes.
If you need funding.
And I know scientists who are very legit scientists. They are doing rigorous research on psychic phenomenon, and they are trying to publish, and they get refused because it's too far out of the box of the scientific establishment.
And I want to stop you before we continue on this. The publishing thing. I keep hearing about being published in scientific journals and things. Can't you just publish yourself anymore? I mean, we could self-publish books.
We can, yeah.
I understand being in the New York Times bestseller list has a value to it. And I'm probably saying something so ridiculous. You're like, well, it's, yeah. But these scientific papers, in other aspects, like other worlds, you don't have to go through the establishment anymore to get attention. Is that even a concept, an idea?
The reason in science is because they want peer review. So they want it published in a credible professional journal where your peers can review it, and then your peers can assess whether, no, you had to have done something wrong, this is bogus, or whether, yeah, this is rigorous, it stands up, go ahead and publish it, and then we'll figure out what it means. So the peer review process is really integral to the scientific establishment, if you will. And then the more you have your peer review publications out there, the more credibility you have in that world, the more reputation and so forth. But in today's world, there's the self-publishing world. You can put things on the internet. There's very different channels now available than what used to be. Everything used to go through the guardians of, those publications in order to be put out there to the public.
Yeah, like what Graham Hancock on A Different World, is doing with Ancient Mysteries, and the establishment is just before he would have had to go through the establishment.
Yeah, he wouldn't have had a choice.
It wouldn't have a choice, but now he has a Netflix show, and they actually were trying to take the Netflix show down because they were like, "This is the pseudoscience. This is the
greatest threat.
This is the greatest threat of blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
And I keep seeing more and more of that. So I was just wondering if there is a world for that, and I have a feeling. Not only is there, but it's going to get worse for the establishment as we continue.
Yeah, I think the establishment has been built on that old paradigm, and there's parts of it that are just crumbling. And then, meanwhile, there's new resources and new options available to people, and they're just going to find a way forward and use a new way. I mean, even old traditional media is falling apart, and exactly. Right. People don't trust those sources as much anymore because of all the censoring and the bias that comes in.
What? Stop it!
I know. How dare I say?
I know
what? Bias.
What?
So with the science of psychic phenomenon, there is very credible research. I mean, I think Dean Radin, for example, has
Dean
done
Radin
some amazing
work.
research.
Yeah.
And he's got some smoking guns about how consciousness can be proven to affect quantum phenomenon and the way in which the double slit experiment, for example, which slit does it go through? Can we collapse the waveform? All of that. And he's very well given some solid evidence of that. And yet it will not be published in a mainstream journal because it's just too far out of their box. And they won't even look at it. They'll just say, oh, nope, pseudoscience, boom. And they disregard it. Yeah, there's been a closed-mindedness. And this is part of I had a distaste for in the physics community, the closed-mindedness. And yet scientists are supposed to stay open-minded and not biased. They're supposed to let the evidence speak for itself. And so I think that the scientific dogma kind of rooted in, and scientism became its own religion.
But why are they so scared?
Because people have built their careers on a certain framework and a certain...
And certain textbooks have already been written, and I get residuals off those textbooks.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about the textbooks so much as their whole credibility of their whole reputation, their whole career, everything is built on that. And humans tend to not like change. And so when when change is pushing upon them, they feel threatened, and it's like they have to reinvent everything. And it's not just about the science, it's about their identity. I think that's really what comes down to is scientists are people too. And yet people tend to wrap their identity around who they are, what they do in the world. Mm-hmm. And when that becomes threatened, like the ego, fights really hard against that threat, if you will, of no, I have to reevaluate who I am. And if this isn't who I am, then who am I? What am I?
I waste 50 years of my life.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Have I been chasing the wrong thing, the whole time? Have I been living a lie the whole time? So people have to reevaluate these things, right? And it can be upsetting. And so I think it's worked to a degree, right? The old paradigm has obviously shown a lot of validity. And it's not that we're saying it's all bad. It's just that we need a bigger perspective. It's like we need to shift to a higher dimension. So, it reminds me of these graphics where you have like a cylinder, and then it projects the light on one direction, and it shows up on a two-dimensional screen as a square. And then on the other direction, 90 degrees, the light shines on, and it's a circle. And is it a circle or is it a square? So if you're only looking from one lower dimensional way of looking at it, you're going to say it's one or the other. It can't be both. But if you can shift to the higher dimensional perspective, you see, oh, it's a cylinder, so it is both. So those paradoxes can be reconciled when you shift to a higher dimensional awareness that can see the lower dimension, but sees that there's more to the picture than what we could recognize before. And that shift to a higher dimensional awareness is what the human collective consciousness, I believe, needs to go through right now, so that we can see from a bigger perspective. And part of that bigger perspective needs to be that we recognize our connection with everybody. If we realize that we're all connected, and what I do to you, it's also being done to me, I wouldn't be declaring war against you so much, right?
Right.
Unless I hate myself.
Right. Well, there's that.
Well, there's that. And so, and that consciousness plays a role. And if I realize that consciousness plays a role, and what I think is informing, right? What I'm thinking, for better or for worse, is informing the quantum field. And then that's going to ultimately, my observer effect is going to somehow manifest that. Then I'm going to start cleaning up my thoughts, right? Because I don't want to manifest, suffering for myself. So the idea of uncertainty is like most people in the egoic way, and in sort of the way we've been programmed to view things, is to fear uncertainty.
Right.
But in the quantum view of things, uncertainty gives me infinite possibilities. It gives me so much new opportunity and options available. And then I get to choose what I want to create versus, fearing the uncertainty.
That's a very beautiful way of looking at that same thing, but looking at it from two very different perspectives. Exactly. A higher dimensional perspective, if you will.
Yeah.
Because most of us are feared of uncertainty. But from the quantum, it's like, oh, uncertainty. Yay,
yeah.
Now I get to choose.
Yeah. And in my training, through the mystery school training, through Kabbalah, and through the quantum, sort of mindset, it's like I look to challenges as opportunities. I look to uncertainty as like, okay, what do you want to create? How are you going to apply your will? How are you going to, harness those forces of creation and direct it to create something really beautiful, rather than just being driven by fight, flight, freeze, ego, victimhood, all these things that the world out there wants to program us with.
It seems like every industry, every modality is going through this reckoning right now, from healthcare, from the healing arts. I know a lot about different kinds of healing, energy healing, things like that are valid and been around for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the medical establishment, I heard someone say the other day, they're great at theatrics, which is a good thing, meaning that you're shot, don't rub a leaf on me. Take me into a trauma. That's what they're really good at. But long-term care or long-term chronic issues, not so much. They try, but not so much. And I'm using this, there's case by case, but generally speaking. So that area, the economic world, I mean, that's a whole other system. Education is a whole other system. Media, another. Religion, all of it seems to be crumbling.
It is, yeah.
It's exciting for people like you and I sitting in these chairs, but terrifying for other people who've built their entire careers or identities around an idea that they've kind of grown up with or been trained into. I can only imagine what's happening in the Vatican and what they've seen over the last 15 to 20 years. When I was growing up, the Vatican was the Rock of Gibraltar. Like nothing could even scathe it.
But even the Vatican is changing its tune, right?
Well, yeah.
They're saying we all worship the same God, and even if aliens are real, we all worship, we all fall under the same God, so they can,
Oh yeah, didn't you hear that the Pope said hell kind of more of an idea than a physical place? He literally said that the other day, and of course the hardcore Catholics were like, sacrilege, there has to be a physical place where they poke you with a pitchfork. They are trying to change it, but it's kind of like the music on the Titanic, like
but the Titanic is heading towards an iceberg, right? And so that old paradigm way, the old structures, it's all heading towards an iceberg. And it's like, at what point?
And they see it.
Yeah, at what point are you going to redirect your course versus just keep heading towards that iceberg? And so I think that as those old systems are falling apart, and medicine, education, like that, it's not that there's good pieces in each of them, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like we need to, this is where the alchemy comes in, right? It's like you start with your raw materia, you take it through a purification process and a transformation process, you keep the good that is essential, but then you discard the places where the pollution has come in, where the corruption has come in.
The dogma,
the stuff that's not eternal and essential, you discard that, and then you bring the essentials together in a new form. And so, but in some ways, I think with people, because they resist change, they need for the disruption to happen because it wakes them up. And I think that there are a lot of people who have their careers in those fields who look at what's going on and they're not happy with it. They know that there's certain things that just are being done that are not right, and whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's the various agendas coming in, whether it's the ideologies that are starting to come in and pollute. They're not happy with it, and some of them are speaking out. We saw this during COVID, where you had big pharma and the medicine. Everyone has to be vaccinated; it's the only way. And then you had the people who were trying to speak out as an alternative perspective, and they were silenced, right? But they felt so strongly about it that they had to speak up and say, no, this isn't the only way. And we have to keep an open mind to many possibilities, not just one. And I understand that it was a crisis time and we needed to find a solution so the world could open up again, if you will. But there are people within those industries that know that things need to change. So the challenge is that they need to find what are our alternatives, right? And a lot of them just haven't been exposed to the alternatives that you and I have because we've searched for them. And so they come to this sort of crisis point where that crisis point is a wake-up call time. And this is actually the first stage of alchemy, is what we call calcination, where you have something is burned, your old worldview, your things fall apart. It's like the rug got pulled out from under you, and everything that you thought was solid and true is now burning away to ash around you, and it's a crisis. And the ego gets burned, the identity gets burned, and it puts you on this search, or it catalyzes this alchemical process that needs to start moving forward so that you can change and evolve. So unfortunately, people sometimes need that wake-up call. They need the old structure to fall apart before they're willing to start seeking alternative solutions, because they're not so proactive.
Right.
Those who are proactive, they're already ahead of the game. They've seen it coming. They've started searching. They've been already waking up and seeking alternative sources. But ultimately, I think the new paradigm that we're moving into will draw the best stuff out of the old paradigm and then bring in the new and find this beautiful synergy and synthesis between them.
Do you think it's going to be that easy?
No, I didn't say easy.
Because the way you said it, you're like, we'll take the good and then take the bad and we'll synergize. I'm like, I love that idea, by the way, and I think it's amazing. But I'm like, that old system's going to be holding tight, and it's going to fight.
It will. It has been.
It's going to be fighting. You said that that in the first stage, and I want to ask you about the 7 stages of alchemy. I'm fascinated with it. But that first stage is you need that disruption. You need that thing to burn away. And for me, there was a point where I wanted to open up a post-production house and go off on my own, but I had a really good paying job.
Yeah.
And that check, but I hated it. I hated doing the work. I didn't want to do it. I was angry. I was a pain in the ass to deal with. So I needed to be fired in order to be forced into like, okay, now I can go do it, because that was just like that honey pot was so nice. The attachment to that check I don't have
Lifestyle.
to work for. Yeah, of course. To go out and take a risk. And that's when I went off and took a risk.
Yeah.
So I think that happens to all of us in our lives. And these industries are going to, the pandemic was a huge wake-up call. Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be multiple more wake-up calls in the next, before 2030, these next 6 years? Because it seems like every week there's something new crazy happening.
I do. Yeah, there's a lot more coming. I feel like we're heading into a bit of a storm. Don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but you just look at what's going on in the world, and there's a big storm brewing on so many different fronts.
Everywhere, yeah.
And, I think that COVID was a wake-up call, right? Let's just look at that for a moment.
It was a warning shot.
It was a massive wake-up call. Yeah. And what did everyone have to do, during COVID, right?
Look inside.
You had to look inside. You had to become more conscious of your actions and the impact that you might have had on another person. The airlines had to clean up, like all of the, they had to sanitize everything, they had to clean, everyone had to be much more conscientious about how do they influence others. Yeah. And it wasn't just about local areas, because if you traveled, you take it from one area to another, and that's how it all spread globally anyways. So we saw that, oh wow, the world really is connected. And so we learned through that process that we had to step up our game and implement some new strategies in the world in order to get out of that pandemic. But look at what's happened since then. Are the airlines still cleaning and sanitizing?
They do give you a sanitizer.
No, they don't anymore.
No, I got one the other day.
Okay, well, that's one of the few airlines that's doing it anymore. I got one the other day. Occasionally they'll hand you sanitizer. They aren't even wiping down their tray tables sometimes anymore. They've gone straight back to how it was before. So have we learned the lesson? Right? And we can apply this to our own lives as well. You get a wake-up call and you're like, okay, right, we got to change. I got to do this. And you start making changes, and it's like, great, we've gotten out of that. Woohoo. But then you start getting lazy again. You start cutting corners again. You fall back into old ways again. So then you didn't learn the lesson and you have to repeat it. Yeah. And I think that's what's going on. These wake-up calls will keep coming until humanity just actually realizes, okay, we have to shift, right? We have to learn the lesson. We can't keep repeating the lesson. We have to implement long-range changes, sustainable changes, rather than just short-term Band-Aids.
But Dr. Theresa, from my experience in life, when the universe tries to send you a lesson, it at first taps you on the shoulder.
Yes.
So occasionally it'll whisper in your ear, and it's going to give you a tap. It's going to be a push, a shove, maybe even a punch in the arm, and then you're going to get a sledgehammer to the head.
I know.
So we haven't had a sledgehammer to the head yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
And I hope we don't have to.
I hope we don't have to go there, but these will escalate. These wake-up calls will escalate. And I don't think I hope we don't have another pandemic style thing, but there might be a war. There might be an economic downturn. There might be an environmental catastrophe. I mean, right now as we're talking, there's a giant hurricane coming that is picking up where a hurricane just left off a week and a half ago. Yeah. They're still cleaning up, and there's another one coming in. And I'm from Florida, so I very much know
I'm supposed to be flying to Florida tomorrow, which isn't going to happen.
Probably not going to happen. I think you might be sticking around in Austin for a little bit or go somewhere else. But these things are going to happen. And I look at it as this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, is that in order for something to be birthed, there has to be a tremendous amount of pain. And just look at the birthing process. If you look at the birthing process and didn't know that there was a baby coming, you thought that woman was about to die. If you just saw that without knowing why is their belly big, what's coming, like no one knew what was, if you knew, you thought that woman is about to die. It's a very painful.
You had no concept of the nature of what was happening.
Exactly. All you saw was the pain. But then when that baby comes out, the storm stops. And then the beauty of the birthing process has happened and something beautiful has been brought in. I do believe that humanity's kind of starting to go into some labor pains, if we could use that analogy, before this birthing process. So it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be, fun, but it's, I think, a necessary thing. And I think that happens with our lives. You have to go through breakups in order to find your true love many times. Yes. You have to have pain in order, or obstacles, and overcome obstacles to get to the other side. Without the contrast.
But here's the thing. So we prolong the pain when we try to avoid it.
Of course.
Right. And if we stick with the birthing process analogy, if the mother learns to breathe with it, and if
there's ways to deal with it.
And there's more, natural birth ways that can reduce the pain. There's many tools that could be used to help create a more, ecstatic birthing process. It could be, even. Yes,
absolutely.
Rather than it having to be a painful birthing process. And a lot of that has to do with education and proactivity, being proactive about it, working and pushing with the contractions versus trying to fight and avoid them and because of fear, right? And, I like to use a less graphic analogy.
I'm a filmmaker. I like visuals. I like to tell stories. I apologize.
I like the analogy of a butterfly, right?
Of course. It's not nearly cinematic, but I'll go with it.
But it works perfectly with the 7 stages of alchemy.
So tell us about the 7 stages of alchemy.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you through the metamorphosis process. Okay. So you have the caterpillar, and the caterpillar is, crawling on the land and very earthbound and feeding on the leaves and getting really fat and so forth. And it's just consuming, and that's its existence. It's very earthbound and basic. But at some point, there's this little clock that goes off inside of its DNA, and it decides that it's going to go take a nap. And in the process of going and taking a nap, it spins itself this little chrysalis. Once it goes into that chrysalis, it breaks down. The whole structure of the caterpillar breaks down. And that is like the calcination process. It becomes, like if you were to open up a chrysalis in the early stages, it would be a gooey mess. You would not see anything that resembled a caterpillar in there.
It's a fascinating process, isn't it? But it breaks it down to the DNA, almost to the
cellular level.
To the cellular level, yeah.
And in that process, then there's these the old cells, right? The old cells of the caterpillar think they're dying, or they think there's an invasion, some virus, something, some enemy is coming into the system, and it's the reason that it's all falling apart. And then you have these new cells coming in that are being put out by the DNA signals, and they're called imaginal cells. And the imaginal cells are the ones that hold the blueprint for the butterfly. And so the old cells start seeing these imaginal cells come in, and they think these are the foreign invaders. Attack, attack, attack. And so there's this this second stage where it's very like everything's being dissolved. There's kind of this murkiness. It's, you know, it's emotional, and that's in alchemy, the disillusion, right? It's like for us personally, after the ego gets burned, you get emotional, you feel disillusioned by life, these types of things, and then at some point, the imaginal cells keep coming. And they, at first, are sort of almost like a stem cell. They kind of have to do everything. But then at some point, they start to find each other and gather in numbers. And they find that when they gather in numbers, they're able to defend off the attacks from the old immune system of the previous structure. And as they gather numbers, they also can start to diversify. So instead of having to be stem cells, they can start to take on different roles. One can start to be a color cell. One can be an antenna. They diversify. And in time, the more they continue to gather, the more this new structure starts to emerge, this new scaffolding, if you will, that will become the butterfly. Mm-hmm. And that's the third stage. That's the separations where things are starting to clarify of what's important to keep and what do we need to discard and what's working, what's not working. And there's this clarity that starts to come in. And then there's another stage where some of those old cells could still be useful. Right? They don't need to die off. They can be useful because a digestive cell in the caterpillar can still be a digestive cell in the butterfly. They just need to repurpose. They need to take their skill set and realign with a new structure. And as they start to do that, the butterfly forms even more. And that becomes this, this blending of old and new, if you will, that becomes what we call the conjunction stage, the fourth stage of alchemy. And so then the butterfly really starts to emerge in this process. The old cells that refuse to realign with the new will die off, right? But there will be others that will choose to align with the new and repurpose. They'll adapt to the new paradigm, if you will. But there's still 3 more stages of alchemy that need to go on. Now, in our experience, you've gone through the burn, you've had the emotional time, you've gotten to some new clarity, you've implemented some new aspects of life, and you've gotten to a new place where it's like, okay, things are going good again, right? We can emerge, but it's actually premature. It's not ready to emerge yet. And it needs to go through a couple more stages of refinement, of maturing, of perfecting. And so, the process with the caterpillar to the butterfly, it continues to sort of get everything in place. And at some point, it's like, it's time, and it's growing, right? And as it grows, that chrysalis starts to crack open. And as it cracks open, the light starts coming in, but the butterfly has to struggle to get out of the chrysalis. Now, that struggle phase is where we are at the moment. I think that we're not just in the soupy mess. We're in the place where the light is coming in, and the chrysalis is starting to open up, but there's the struggle to get out, to break free from the old structure, if you will. And if someone were to come in and see, oh, this poor little butterfly, it's struggling, let me help it, and we open that up and it comes out, but it can't fly because its wings aren't strong enough. It has to go through the struggle to become stronger. And only when it struggles to get out of that chrysalis on its own effort and then finally breaks free, are its wings going to be strong enough for it to fly. And even once it breaks free, it's okay, that was exhausting, right? That was a lot of work, and I think I need a rest now. So it just sits there for a while, and it needs to dry off before it's like, okay, I'm ready to go fly and taste all the fruit and, visit all the flowers and bring the beauty to the world. So these are, the 7 stages. The distillation stage would be that part where it's drying off. And then the final stage, the coagulation, would be where it finally takes flight.
Dr. Theresa, that was extremely graphic. I don't know what you're talking about.
Visual of it.
As you're saying it, the old and the new, and parts of the old that choose to come with the new will survive. If not, it will literally die off. That's exactly what's happening. But I have to ask you, why is everything speeding up so much? I mean, I think you and I are of similar vintage, or close to it at least. So when we were growing up, things moved a lot slower.
Yeah, a lot slower.
I mean, the 80s and the 90s. I mean, I remember VHS and DVD.
Cassette tapes.
8-track. I was I wasn't playing 8-tracks. I heard of them.
Vinyl records.
Vinyls are back. But all of these, things moved so much slower. Companies were around for 100 years, not 100 days, like they are now, literally. Yeah. But everything seems to be speeding up. I mean, just the other day, AI was introduced truly in the zeitgeist. And now it's literally in so many parts of our lives. But I literally remember a year or two ago, I mean, we knew of the term AI, but like ChatGPT came in.
Right. It was all the news. And
then changed everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it just changed everything so quickly. And now we're like exponentially growing faster. I was downtown Austin. I saw a self-driving car. I'm like, what is happening? It's moving so fast.
It reminds me of the Jetsons, right? We're coming into
I'm
the
still
era
waiting for the
we're
flying
learn
cars.
in the Jetsons.
We're still waiting for the flying cars. We don't have a Rosie yet, but we have versions of her.
They're coming. They're coming.
But things are moving so fast, and I also believe it's happening in the spiritual space, in our awakening, where things from the 60s was a small group of people from California who started the hippie movement and all that stuff, to the 70s. It was a slow process, the metaphysical movement, without being burned at the stake. But now it seems to be moving so fast. So everything seems to be speeding up. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, so there's an as above, so below, right? So there's why is it speeding up below? Well, technology, right? And technology, they say, is on an exponential curve.
Sure.
So the rate of the change of technology has definitely moved past that inflection point where it starts to go almost vertical. So there's a very rapid acceleration of the advancement of technologies right now. And that is speeding up things in our lives. I mean, just look at how once the internet came in, things really sped up because you had emails and you could instantly get in touch with people. And then they started expecting you to respond away.
It took a second. It took
time, but
there was no JPEGs even back then.
It took time.
The dial-up. But it did. But now it's moving so exponentially.
Yeah, and now people expect instant response.
I want my toilet paper to be at my door in an hour.
So the conveniences that have been brought to us through technology,
we remember when those weren't around.
I know. But the younger generations don't remember that. So they're growing up expecting that things should be as easy as the click of a button,
right?
And as fast,
and have all media that's ever been made,
right,
at your fingertips.
Right.
You don't have to wait till Saturday morning to see cartoons.
Yeah. So there's a very practical side to why things are speeding up, and that when we're still operating from that three-dimensional Newtonian way of doing things, we're struggling to keep up with that pace of change. But from as you mentioned, there is a spiritual acceleration that's coming up. It's like we're going through a quickening, an awakening in the collective consciousness of humanity, and I think that's. I believe that there is sort of like the timing of the butterfly. At some point that, timer went off in the DNA and it's like, right, it's time to change. It's just happening. It's within our DNA, right? There's something inside of humanity at a very core DNA level. Not that we're going to mutate into something else, but maybe we will. Maybe there will be some fusion that happens between tech and biology. It's already
happening. Yeah.
So there is something coming in, and from a spiritual metaphysical perspective, it's like there's a necessity for humanity to wake up. Because if we don't, we are on a course of self-destruction. Because you can, again, like kind of what I said before, we can take that knowledge and technology, and then you can put it in the hands of a few bad actors, and they can do some serious damage to the whole collective. And so because our knowledge and technology is advancing so much, there is a necessity for greater awakening of consciousness, greater wisdom to come in so that we can harness the same technology and use it towards the good of the whole rather than just the good of the few, or rather than for nefarious purposes. And so they have to, as above, so below, it has to kind of come together. And I think the exciting thing is that there have been times on the planet in our history where humanity's maybe tried to wake up, right? We had a Renaissance, we had a Golden Age, we had times of, the libraries of Alexandria. We had times where there was a uniting of different traditions trying to come together and bring an age of enlightenment, if you will. But we never had the technology that we have today. We didn't have the ease of connectivity all around the globe, all throughout the whole of the human collective that we do today. Right. So there's something really unique about this time right now. There's better resources available at this time right now. And there's, I think, a greater readiness within the collective and in the heart of good people who are ready for change. And everyone knows that they want change. They know that the system isn't working, and they're crying out for that change. And some of them just aren't going about it in the right way. They're doing the activism, and they're angry, and they're
politics. Right?
Yes, that isn't necessarily going to be the right way to make the change. But at the root of it is this need and this desire for and recognition of change is needed.
Yes, without doubt. Now, you were talking about DNA. How do you unlock your DNA? I heard you talking about something about unlocking the full potential of your DNA. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, our DNA is what science knows about our DNA. It maybe amounts to about 5% of what's in our DNA.
Kind of like we can only see 3% of the viewable universe.
Or 1%.
1%, exactly. Yeah. Or less than that, probably. Yeah.
And we maybe are only consciously using about 10% of our brain capacity. The rest is unconscious or subconscious. And so there's a very small percentage of our DNA that science actually understands. They're still researching into these other parts of the DNA that they call the non-coding parts. And
what's mean by non-coding? So I understand DNA has code in it.
Coding means, so the coding sections means the parts of the genetic code that create amino acids that build for proteins. So those are the genes. The coding parts are the genes, but those genes only amount to somewhere between 3 to 5%. There's like 1% or 2% that is like the stop and start instructions for, how to translate those genes or where those genes stop and start. But then there's these other sections, and they used to call them junk DNA.
Yeah, I was about to say, where's the junk DNA?
Yes.
Which is hilarious
because
the universe...
It's a marker of the arrogance of
science. Have you ever... The arrogance is amazing. Have you ever looked at just a normal nature documentary and can see that, that's just junk stuff that the cheetah's doing? No, it's all perfectly designed. The arrogance. But go ahead.
Right. So science is starting to change its tune about whether it's junk DNA, right? They used to say, it's just left over from evolution. It's not needed anymore.
Amazing.
My perspective of it was always like, if it wasn't needed anymore, evolution would have gotten rid of it already, because it's highly inefficient for the DNA to have to unwind, open up, transcribe, rewind, tighten up again, all of that for 95% of it to have been junk. It's inefficient. And so that would not have lasted. So my perspective has always been that's potential that has yet to be tapped into. It's mysteries that we have to solve still. There's greater potential within our DNA that we're still trying to understand. And now they're starting to discover that in those sections of the what they call non-coding DNA that doesn't code for the proteins, it's not the genes, it's actually the instructions to tell which genes, because one gene can create different proteins. And it's the metacode. It's the code that tells the genes what to do. It also interacts with the epigenetic layers, telling it where to turn on and off. It controls the morphology of the DNA to even allow for certain parts of it to be accessible or not accessible. So it's like the master code is contained within these non-coding sections. Also, there's a part of the DNA that in America, the scientists haven't been researching it. But in Germany and Japan and Russia, certain other countries, there's been a lot of research that's been going into it where they talk about that the fact that the DNA actually emits and receives coherent light, like laser-like light, like little LED light, and it's in the visible spectrum. And the DNA is using this coherent light to communicate. Through all the DNA of the body, it's communicating with light. And from a spiritual metaphysical perspective, that light is flowing down the center core of the DNA. But the DNA itself isn't just the physical blueprint. There's an etheric blueprint as well that the physical chemicals just sort of orient around. And that spiritual blueprint is what we can go in there and sort of turn on the switches again, if you will, to remind it of the light and awaken that potential through specific modalities that are handed down through ancient tradition.
So let me ask you this, because now I want to go down a rabbit hole here. The idea that the DNA, there are areas of the DNA that are not active, very similar to our mind, that there are areas that are not conscious, if you will. Studying the yogic philosophy so much, I've always been fascinated with the enlightened yogi and the, I forgot, is it pranas, or the powers, the yogic powers that they've been able to get, levitation, manifestation, biolocation, all these things has been documented multiple times over the course of centuries. Jesus essentially was a great yogi in the way that he did his miracles. When I read that, I was like, it's pretty much what I've been reading about yogis. What's the science potential behind those ideas? So let's say, for example, hypothesis that what we're reading about these yogis and these masters in all aspects of life, in Christian and in other aspects of life, there are other mystics who are able to do superhuman feats, do things that science, as we look right now, are not able to really understand. But, again, you keep reading about these things. Let's say it is real. Is there a correlation between the DNA activating aspects of it through the frequency, rising with the frequency and connecting more to the internal source?
I think there's a combination of things there. Okay. So there is certainly an awakening of potential within. And I believe, that there had to have been some form of turning on switches within their DNA through, or maybe it's just even turning on from the epigenetic layers, they're turning on more capacity, more potential. But I think it's, some of it's a rewiring of the brain. Some of it's an opening up of their sensory perception. Some of it's a cultivation of their chi, through spiritual practices. Some of it is that they're, really learning to harness the alchemical factory that their body even is, through breath work, for example, through meditation, through qigong, through various forms of ritual magic. And they learn how to harness their energy field, not just their physical body, but their biofield, their energy field, that we have so much capacity to us. And the more that we learn to tune our consciousness in beyond just the physical body into the energy field, into the soul body, into the spirit body, you start tapping into more and more infinite resource that you can, through your will, through your intention, through harnessing and focusing that energy of what you want to direct it towards, you can flow it. But you have to achieve a great level of mastery to be able to do that and to direct it well, right? And to direct it in service to what is going to actually bring good. These energies could also be harnessed,
of course,
and used in a negative way, and have been. So the developmental process is another tool. All of these are tools for how to harness our potential, but then it's ultimately to the individual to clean up and surrender the ego to a higher purpose and higher wisdom to guide their use of it versus for egoic purposes. And that's ultimately the defining feature is, are you doing this from ego, or are you doing this from true spirit and altruism? And
in the yogic traditions, that these powers are traps, they're tests, because they could become very intoxicating.
Yes.
Very intoxicating. And they're just off on your path. They're just kind of like side roads that happen. It's an offspring of your path. But if you choose to go down that side, you're going to get locked. You're going to get locked in there. You're going to get off the beaten path,
right,
and not go what you're. So they're little traps, if you will.
Yeah,
tests.
even like experiencing euphoric states is a trap.
Oh my God! Of course it is.
I mean, how much of a trap is that in the world right now for people who are spiritual seekers? You know, they're seeking this sort of mystical euphoric state, but that's not what enlightenment's about. Enlightenment is about serving your fellow human.
Correct.
And helping to bring a better world to this planet rather than just kind of going off and experiencing your little bliss. So that's a trap, right? And so we need to kind of redirect back on track. Now, I would say with all of these masters, it wasn't just a process of them just sort of achieving enlightenment. Like they went and got training. They went and studied with other masters. They got initiated in ancient lineages. They learned tools that were tried and true and tested. You know, someone like Jesus, not only did he study in the yogic traditions, he went to Egypt, he went to Tibet. He, you know,
what? No, what?
So he got initiated and trained. He studied in the Greek in Alexandria, right? So there were ancient mystery school traditions that all of them were initiated into, trained in. That's how they got to be who they were. But the thing is that all of them said the kind of thing like, do it this way, do the way I do, and then you can become this as well, right? Jesus said, you know,
everything I could do, you could do and more.
And greater, right? And I'm showing you the way, but you have to wake up to your own godhood. You know, you are gods, but you do not know it is one of the quotes in one of the Gnostic Gospels of that, you know, according to
sacrilege, but yes.
Yeah, well, it rings true.
Absolutely. I mean, I won't go down the road of what they've done to Jesus' teachings. Yeah. Yogananda said it best. He was crucified in one day, but his teachings have been crucified for 2,000 years. Yeah. And I was like, yep, that pretty much says it. Yeah. Now, you brought up a concept of chi. And since I have you here, from a scientific perspective, how do you explain this concept of chi or gi in Japan, where it is this life force? And for gentlemen of my age, the force,
which is where, be with you.
Yes, that's where George got it from. It's this universal energy that surrounds, as if I may quote Yoda, it is all of us. It's in us. It is around us. It is part of us. And then basically, according to Yoda, it's about focusing your intention, your mind, to control the force, to use it for to have it as your bidding. And martial artists, obviously, very high level martial artists can control chi to create heat, to create extreme power, all this stuff. From a scientific perspective, how do you explain chi?
So
I know this is not one of your books, but I'm just curious.
So, you know, when you talk about the force, I would say that that the totality of the force is more beyond just chi.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So to me, the chi is the vital life force energy within the body. Okay. And there are, you know, there's endocrine system, there are fluids that run through the body that you can use the breath to focus and to almost like squeeze and pump the various endocrine glands. And some of those then put out different chemicals, which can then, you know, polymerize if you have an abundance of them, and they can become new things. And so there's that part of it, which is an actual biochemical process that's happening, not just through chi, but I think some, you know, various breath work, yogic, chakra work, all these types of things, because the chakras relate to the endocrine glands. And but then we have the biofield. And the biofield is very scientifically explained by now. I mean, we know that we are putting off electricity and magnetism all the time. That I believe that there's etheric energy, which is sort of like that fifth element, you know, the ether that scientists at one point discarded. At one point they believed in it. Then they said, well, we can't measure it, so it's not there. There is no ether. Now they're starting to talk about ether again.
So is that kind of like the field, the Akashic field?
The quantum field.
The quantum field?
Yeah. The quantum, the 0 point field.
Right.
The energy of the vacuum itself.
Right.
That is non-zero, right? Sure. There's this vast energy there, and so we are multi-vibrational, multi-dimensional beings, And, when you're doing Qigong or Tai Chi or, various martial arts, you are learning to feel the energy. Like you can feel magnetism in your palms. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
people could just clap their hands really hard, rub their hands together, and then sort of bring it just to a slow, and you'll feel like if you do it, you want to rub it together enough so that you feel the heat and that friction really kind of creating. And what's happening here is you're rushing the blood into the hands. When you are rubbing them together, you're ionizing things on the surface of the skin. And then as you bring them kind of slowly together like this, the ions moving past each other. So the ions will create an electric field. Moving past each other, it creates a magnetic field, and you will feel the gradient of that energy. So it's very physical, right? There are physical explanations for it. But I believe that in the various martial arts, they have learned to harness this qi, the magnetic energy, and the vitality of the body itself, and flow it and circulate it through the body, and then condense it and grow it and expand it. Very much like going to the gym and you're pumping weights and you're building the muscle and you're doing your cardio and you're getting more fit. You have an energy body that you can exercise, and various practices like Qigong and martial arts are gonna help you especially if they're working with the qi, which follows the breath and your intention. So you have to work with visualization and intent. So consciousness definitely comes into it. There's a quantum sort of bridge there with that qi.
So, but Doc, these things you're talking about, Qigong, Tai Chi, these ideas, these are ancient ideas. What is it about the old ancient texts that we forgot and now we're trying to rediscover? Because the concept of the matrix or the illusion or that we're in a construct of reality, that's Maya. That's the great illusion. That's the aborigine, the dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's these ideas have been around forever, but yet we seem to be catching up to these ideas. We're now starting to figure these things out. Why did we forget?
Well, we went into a dark ages for one thing, and there was a lot of books that were burned like the burning of, even during the Crusades, right? We have libraries being burned in Alexandria, many other book burnings, heretics, being burned at the stake because, with the Inquisition and witch hunts and so forth, because they taught something different from the establishment.
Oh, there's religion again.
Right? So there was the suppression. It wasn't just religion. It was also,
political.
Kings who owed money to them, or, something along those lines.
Let's
like
burn the books while we're at it.
Yeah. And so there was this suppression, and various powers that wanted to stay in power and control would actually attack. They would try to eliminate. There would be genocides, like the Cathars. There's a genocide against them, whereas Christian against Christian, because they were just different varieties of Christianity.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's been a concerted effort to try and suppress some of the ancient wisdom. I think the core of the ancient wisdom is ultimately teaching you that you are God, that the divine is within you. It's not outside of you. You're not some lowly human sinner who, is not worthy. Like, no, you are powerful. Like, there is immense power within you and huge responsibility to, awaken to that power and to make better choices so that you can create a better world. And so that is ultimately the core essence of so many of those ancient scriptures and wisdom teachings. And that's what we're remembering now. And even if it tries to be suppressed at one age, ultimately it goes underground and it waits for the next age when people are more open and ready to embrace and be tolerant and embrace these teachings again and have freedom to pursue your own development, pursue according to what you feel called to versus what is imposed upon you. And we're very fortunate to live in this time where we have that
have
freedom.
This open conversation.
Yeah.
Something like this. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this conversation, I always say 20 years ago doesn't happen in a public forum.
Yeah, well, it might have, but
It might have,
not
but
like this. Yeah.
not like this. It's everywhere now, and these ideas are being spread around the world through the internet and through technology. Like this show couldn't have happened 15 years ago in the way that it's happening now, because the technology wasn't. It was just starting. The butterfly hadn't gotten out yet.
Yeah,
hadn't cracked open the cocoon yet. So it's fascinating. We've talked a little bit about accessing consciousness, the higher consciousness. How does one do that for themselves from your perspective? How can one connect to the higher self, to higher knowledge, higher understanding, all these things that you and I have been talking about, where you and I understand at a deep level because we've done the work and we've gone down that road. But for someone listening who's like, this sounds weird, man, but I really am interested in this, what would you suggest?
My best advice is don't try to just do it on your own, because it is a maze. And you can fall into the traps, as you mentioned, from various teachings of the yogic tradition, that we need a guide. And while there's so much available on the internet today and in books and so forth, the ancient teachings were always according to a tradition of face-to-face.
Yep.
And oral tradition. This is alive. How to do this is not a static thing. So you could read a book and get information, but it doesn't necessarily bring the aliveness to it. It doesn't adapt it to you as an individual. Whereas when you're working with a teacher or a guide who actually knows what they're doing and who has the results to show that they know what they're doing, they can work with you as an individual and help guide you through step by step, help you avoid the pitfalls, and that'll basically get you there a lot faster. You can try to do it all on your own, but you're going to hit a lot of walls, and potential pitfalls, and it'll take you a lot longer if you ever even get there. Some people often, when they just try to do everything self-guided, they either get themselves into the wrong, they dabble and they're not quite ready for what they're dabbling in because they lack the foundation for it maybe, or the proper understanding of it, or they just keep hitting the wall and then they kind of get jaded, frustrated, they give up, and they never get there. But when you find the teacher or the guide that resonates with you, that, is the path that you feel called to, I would encourage you, instead of, being someone that flits from this thing to that thing and just tries to sample everything, you can do that first, but at some point you got to find what really speaks to your soul, what really resonates for you as an individual, and then dive deeper into that path and find a teacher who can guide you into the depths of it so that you can really get more to the core, more to the higher level work. Because it is a practice that you have to build up. And every path to enlightenment, and there are many, but every one would require you to have commitment. And that's something that people in the world today seem to lack, is this commitment and the discipline that it takes to have patience through the process. Because alchemy always requires patience and discipline and stick with it. And, it is a journey that we have to go through. So for me, I found that path with the Modern Mystery School. I found some amazing guides and teachers, and it's a Hermetic lineage. It's a Kabbalistic tradition, and we have a lot of different tools. Like we draw from Egyptian, we draw from Sumerian, we draw from Kabbalistic, we draw from some shamanic, right? So I liked it because it was one place where it all kind of came together, but it also went deep, and it had the practices, and it was very much about, yes, the power is in your hand. You just need to have the right keys and the right knowledge and understanding of how to use them, and then it's up to you to go do it, right? So we'll give you the practices and the tools and the keys and the proper knowledge and understanding, but you got to ultimately do the work yourself. I can't do that for you. So it's empowering us to own our own progression, right? Versus I'll just bequeath some of my enlightenment upon you. And so long as you're my devotee, then you will share in my enlightenment. Well, then, if you're ever disconnected from that person, then it's no longer yours, right? So I liked the idea that, no, this is in me, this is going to be mine, and it's up to me. So it's by my merit, by my effort, that I will empower myself. And And so, there's going to be challenges. It's going to be hard work, just like getting fit and masterful at anything. It's going to require, putting in those hours and the hard yards, if you will, but we can get there. And it's a really beautiful adventure. It's a healing adventure. It's a journey of empowerment and transformation that we can go on. And, for the people who aren't quite sure they're ready to delve into like the super magical kind of mystery woo-woo kind of stuff. This is also why my husband and I have created something called the Quantum Learning Academy, which is looking at, okay, let's take the woo out and let's look at the science, and we can look at the Newtonian model versus the quantum model, and how can we adapt these principles as a mindset and learn certain meditation techniques that help us tap into that quantum space, and learn the rules of the game. I look at the two almost like two different games, game boards. Like you have checkers on one hand and chess on the other, right? They both work on the same kind of template. You have the black and white squares on a grid. And chess is very strategic, and you have certain linear moves you can do. And I look at that personally more like a Newtonian way. It's very strategic, and it's very linear, and it's very much bound to the board. But then you have checkers, and checkers, you're kind of making leaps, right? And so to me, the quantum view is more like the checkers game. Now, what if you had a multidimensional game where you could play chess on one, but then you hit a certain square and it pops you up to the checkers board, and then you had to play checkers and take leaps, and then you hit another square and it pops you back down to the chess board. But from the chess, if you only know the game of chess, then you won't understand how that just happened, right? If you're playing an opponent and that opponent knows how to play both games, Newtonian and quantum, right, chess and checkers, but the other opponent only knows how to play one game, who's going to have the advantage?
Of course.
Right? And so there's more possibilities to open up to you when you know how to play by the rules of both games. And they both are valid. They both just work in different contexts. And so when you can learn, yes, I mean, we're mastering the Newtonian game by now, but we haven't mastered that quantum game. And even though there's a lot of people out there talking it's all quantum, it's a lot of hand waving. It's very kind of surface level.
Right.
What do they mean by quantum? They're saying, oh, well, quantum means it's all energy. Quantum means it's all connected. It's like, well, yes, okay, maybe, but there's deeper principles to it and how it works. And there is a certain... there's certain ways that it will work, and there's certain ways it won't work. So it actually needs more specificity and understanding. So this how to play at the quantum level is what we teach in the Quantum Learning Academy.
That's beautiful. Now, one thing, and I think you've come across this with a lot of your students. I have personally done it, and I've seen a lot of people with my show and many teachers that we have on the show, is that a lot of people will just watch shows, will take a course, will read a book, but won't actually do anything. That they just like to, in their identity, say, I'm spiritual because I am watching this show, or I am taking this course, or I am in this person's community, or reading this person's books. What advice do you have for them to actually look in the mirror and go, you're really just kind of brushing the top of the piece of wood here. You need to drill deep in and actually get into the weeds.
Yeah. Spirituality is not an identity.
Yeah, right.
It's not an identity badge. It's not something to just make you feel good about yourself. Right. And you got to be honest with yourself, and you got to look at the results in your life. If you're really living in your full potential, then you should have all those results. And those results are both physical results in the outer life. You've got success, you've got, a stable life, but it's also inner results. You feel joy, you feel peace, you feel fulfillment, you feel very guided by wisdom. And these two need to come together. And if you haven't mastered both the physical and the spiritual, then you've still got work to do.
Fair enough. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. How do you define a fulfilled life?
I define a fulfilled life. I experience a fulfilled life as being really in service to something that is bigger than just me, a bigger mission, a bigger purpose, and knowing that the way I spend my time and energy, even if it's, through what I might consider my career, but for me, it's actually a mission. Mm-hmm. And knowing that the way I'm spending my time and energy is making a difference, a positive difference in the lives of other people and in the world, right? It's actually making positive waves in the world. That is really enriching. It's what brings me joy, and it's extremely fulfilling. But then also at a personal level, it's like I live my little heaven on earth in my own relationship and in in my own life, and so there's the personal part of it, and then there's the outward expression of that into the world and the difference that it makes.
Beautiful. Now, if you had a chance to go back in time and talk to little Theresa, what advice would you give her?
I would tell her to believe in herself and to trust her intuition and trust the dream. Trust the dream. I think we all dream when we're kids of what we want to do, what inspires us, and then as we grow older, we sort of put those childish things away. We're told that dream will never happen. It's not possible, and you put it away. And yeah, if those two things, right? And ultimately I am living the dream, but I didn't know, there's a certain period of time in my life where I didn't know that was possible how to get there. And yet through my spiritual journey, I was able to reclaim those dreams, if you will.
How do you define God or source?
I define source. Let's start with that. As the, like in a Kabbalistic framework, which is very much what I would look at, we talk about source as this energy called Ein Sof, which means without end, limitless, right? It's limitless potential. And as a physicist, I thought, okay, there's infinite energy, infinite potential, everything and nothing. That is the source, but it has a will to it. It has a purpose that it directs the energy of creation with. And to me, God, there's kind of levels, if you will. There's that source level of it, but then there's various other levels as we come down through the dimensions in which it manifests itself in more individuated forms, each one having its own sort of unique piece of that global purpose, all the way down to me. I am God.
Fractals.
Yes. Yeah. And I have my unique purpose and my unique role to play in this grand adventure of the cosmos.
What is love?
Love is a force. Love is a force of creation. And it is, I would say, the ultimate force that can overcome any obstacle.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
That's the big question, right? To me, the ultimate purpose of life is to learn from this experience of the physical, which is a very limited experience, which is very different from our true essence, our true nature, which is infinite spirit. So to take that infinite spirit and to come into a very limited experience of physicality and learn from it and the diversity of it and the challenges of it, and that causes us to grow and evolve into something more, something new. And we each come with a unique purpose here. So there's the purpose of the experience of the physical itself, but then there's also the purpose of us as a collective of humanity and what we're trying to accomplish while we're here. And to me, that's creating a better world, a more peaceful world, a more harmonious and balanced society of life on Earth, of human life on Earth. And then connecting also to, our brothers and sisters in the, galactic space, right? That it's not just about us here. There's a whole, galactic community and so forth. And when we can create that better world on Earth, then we get to graduate, if you will, from just being earthbound caterpillars to butterflies out in the universe. And we're, even from a scientific perspective, like Michio Kaku talks about a type 1 society, that we're at a 0.7 type society right now. We're trying to make the leap into this type 1 society where we will have clean energy, more limitless resource, and it will be available to all, and we'll be then, moving out into space and exploring space, and not just through Newtonian ways of thinking about space travel, but quantum ways of thinking about it. So whether you're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, this leap in human consciousness, or you're looking at it from a scientific perspective, and it's somewhat technologically driven, we're going through a huge shift right now that's very exciting.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world?
Thank you. The first place to go would be theresabullard.com. That is my website with my various aspects of what I do. And then there is kind of more the mystical, the mystery teaching stuff, the mystery school stuff. But my various events and so forth, all of that is right there on theresabullard.com. And then there's also quantumlearningacademy.co, which is more specific to the quantum mindset and some events that we're creating there for helping people adapt into that quantum paradigm.
And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
My parting message would be to recognize that we're going through a huge time of transformation in the world, and it can get chaotic, and it might, but look for the light, right? Look for that light in the darkness. Seek those things that are going to help you find your sense of balance, your centeredness, your peace that is built from within, rather than you having to be so dependent upon everything being good outside in the world and then you're good. That's going to be very challenging to navigate the times ahead. But when you can be balanced and in peace within yourself, because you have practices and tools that help you do that, then no matter what's going on in the world outside of you, you still have your center, and you'll be good. You'll be fine, right? You'll make it through.
Dr. Theresa, it's been such a pleasure having you in studio and having this conversation. It was, I could just keep going down for hours and hours and hours, but I appreciate you so much, not only for being on the show, for helping awaken the planet. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and it's been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.